Good morning, everyone. Hey, I appreciate you taking the time here this morning to join us. Today, what we're going to go through is the concepts of high yield, and more importantly, what we've done with our hybrids to get the maximum yield out of them. You guys are going to be able to get some really good information around how we raise high yielding corn. I encourage you throughout this conversation to think outside of the box a little bit and to think about what are some of these concepts that I can implement on my farm going forward. There is no easy way to get high yields. The best thing you can do is be in your field, be looking at what's going on, and basically be a student of the game. One of the first areas to think about when we talk about high yield is it has to be knowing and understanding your soil. And it's not just your soil, but you have to understand your nutrients as well as your nutrient balance. That really starts with soil pH. If you're not pulling soil test levels routinely, you're probably missing the mark, and that's something that you should be doing. Specifically, you got to be in that 6.5-ish type pH range. And if you're not, look at measures that can correct that. On top of that, one of the things that we routinely see is elements that are in excess. Okay, specifically, the ones that we're most common come across in our daily jobs is excess levels of phosphorus. And if you find yourself in a situation like that, there's a nutrient in zinc that you really need to be considering putting down and adding to your fertility program. We also see excessive nitrogen put down sometimes, and that really can negatively affect potassium, which in turn can really hurt our late season stalk integrity. And finally, you won't see it on here, but boron. Boron is rarely ever in excess, but it can typically be a limiting factor for us, which can really hurt pollination and kernel retention. And if you've got like higher calcium levels in your soils, be thinking about how you can fix that. Okay, so balance is key, but it gets a bit deeper than that. So let's continue to move here and talk about just some basic principles of high yielding corn. Here we've got a couple of slide decks of what does it take to produce a 200 bushel corn crop all the way up to a 350 bushel corn crop. And what you're going to see is no matter where you're at across the scale, if you're taking a bushel of grain off of this field, you're going to typically take about 0.75 pounds of nitrogen, about 0.3 to 0.4 of phosphorus, about 0.25 to 0.3 of potassium, and then roughly about 0.1 of sulfur. So there is no free lunch, okay? It takes nutrients to raise high yielding corn. However, the question that I want to pose is, do we necessarily always have to put down more? Or can we look at some things with placement in the root zone so essentially we can get more yield by using the same amount of nutrients? Okay, so let's think about this concept. Okay, here's my corn root. Okay, I'm in a 30-inch row here, and what science tells us is roughly my root zone is going to take about from center 8 inches each side. So we're going to say about 16 inches. Now let's think of the idea and the concept of if I'm putting down anhydrous in the fall, if I'm side dressing right down the middle of the row mid-season with my nitrogen program, are my roots really getting that? Is that the best place to put my nitrogen fertilizer? And team, we can grow really good corn using this, but I don't see us getting to those ultra high levels by doing things like that. So I'm going to advocate that we don't do that. And I'd like to start the concept of, think about creating your corn plants and your corn roots in like a flower pot type of area where all of our nutrients are where we want it. And if we do that, I think what we'll find is we're going to get some happy corn. And we want happy corn because we never want corn to have a bad day. Okay, let's break this down a bit further. Let's look at this in another level. If we're going out there and we're broadcasting fertilizer and we need to get our roots to intercept it, or we need to have mass forward diffusion to pick it up, I know it's really different if we're just blanket applying or if we're putting it into that flower pot, into that root zone. Okay, but when I look at the root zone, I think of it in two different ways. I think about where should I be putting mobile type nutrients and where should I be putting immobile type nutrients. Okay, so when I think about my mobiles, my nitrogen, sulfur, boron, zinc, magnesium, manganese, I want that in the upper half of the root zone, okay, because that can leach down. When I think about my immobile, my potassium, my phosphorus, even my elemental sulfur, that's probably something I want a little bit deeper into the root zone where the roots can go down and get it. Okay, one last way to take a look at this, kind of using the flower pot analogy, is as I'm going through the season, okay, at that bottom there, let's aim, if we can, to put our P or K or elemental sulfur But then let's talk about something earlier in the season, maybe like a planter application. Really want us to see, and I see our best growers putting some sort of like 80, 20, 100% ortho type pop-up on that seed. We're getting zinc in that furrow, and we start to see sugar sources being used. In addition to that, kind of on the outside of when our nodal and seminal roots are starting to form, we like to see a relay effect where we get to see some nitrogen, sulfur, we want some more phosphorus, we also want some micros, okay? And then finally, if we come back in at like a side dress application, we certainly want to see more nitrogen, more sulfur, probably in a range of at least a 10-to-1 ratio, maybe even down to a 6 or 7-to-1 ratio, depending on your soils. And we like those, again, because those are mobile up there and they'll leach down throughout our profiles. Okay, last thing on this slide here is there was some really good research that came out of Nebraska quite a few years ago, where it goes and it says basically up to 80, from 82 to mathematically 95% of your nitrogen is taken up within 15 inches of that plant. So if you're not putting your nitrogen there, again, I'm not saying we can't raise good corn, but are you being as efficient as you can, and are you driving as much uptake and as much yield? Okay, so those are things to consider.